Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this, and welcome to autumn, the autumnal equinox, having arrived on 9:21 a.m. on September 22nd. This is Left Side of the Aisle, and I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson, and for the next little while, I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that I think are worthy of your attention. Comments, questions, reactions to the show are always welcome. They can be sent to me directly. My personal email, as always, is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be over here a couple of times during the show. You can get the email address from there if you missed it, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. If you do send me email, as always, just two requests. One, please include something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam. And two, be a little patient about getting an answer, because I just stink at answering email. All right, so let's start with one of our frequent features. This is called the Outrage of the Week. There's been a move on to call for President Obama to use his pardon powers before he leaves office and pardon Edward Snowden. Now, personally, I have three reactions to that, but first let's get the legal jargon out of the way. Technically, Snowden can't be pardoned because pardon is legal forgiveness for something of which you have been convicted. But what he can get is a type of executive amnesty, which would have the same impact of freeing him from prosecution. So I just figure pardon sort of serves as a convenient shorthand here. But okay, with that aside, I have three reactions. One, I would love to see such a pardon happen. Two, I cannot imagine that it will, both because Obama has neither the inclination nor does he have the guts to actually do something like that. And three, the person I would really like to see pardoned is Chelsea Manning. But what I want to get to right here is that there were four main media outlets that received from Edward Snowden the secret NSA documents that revealed so much about massive government spying on Americans and, in fact, everybody else in the world. Documents which those media outlets then exercise their own editorial judgment about to determine what parts they would publish and how. Those four main media outlets were The Guardian in the United Kingdom, the New York Times and the Washington Post in the United States, and the online magazine The Intercept. Now, three of those outlets, The Guardian, The Times, and The Intercept, have called for a pardon for Snowden. But on September 18th, the Washington Post published an editorial which not only rejected the idea of a pardon, it explicitly demanded that Snowden be tried on charges of espionage. Now, in so doing, noted Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept, the Washington Post has achieved what he called an ignominious feat in U.S. media history. It has become the first ever paper in this country to explicitly call for the criminal prosecution of its own source. A source on whose back the paper won and eagerly accepted a Pulitzer Prize for public service. The editorial in the Post was particularly critical of the revelations about the PRISM program, the one that allows the NSA to suck up as much of the internet as it can get its hands on. But as Greenwald pointedly notes, it was not Edward Snowden who sent that information out into the world. It was the news editors of the Washington Post who chose to put it on the front page of the newspaper. Snowden was totally uninvolved in any of those decisions because in providing the materials to these media outlets, he specifically stated that he did not trust himself to make the proper editorial judgments about what should and should not be published. But despite that, it is Snowden and only Snowden that the Washington Post would have punished. Now, in fairness and in complete accuracy, I have to note that the news department and the editorial department of the Washington Post are completely separate, and that those on the news side of the paper say that they are still proud of the work they did about NSA spying. Nonetheless, that makes this editorial, which is the institutional voice of the paper, that makes this editorial no less a disgrace, no less a betrayal of their source and of their staff, no less an assault on investigative reporting, no less a repudiation of whistleblowers, no less offensive, no less an outrage. All right, next up. We have to go through this again. When is finally too much? When is it finally too many times? When is it finally too often? When do the lies we tell ourselves, finally stop? The latest Too Much, Too Many, Too Often comes out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. On September 16th, Terence Crutcher, 40 years old, became the latest addition to the ever-lengthening list of names of unarmed black men shot and killed by police. He was, in fact, according to a Washington Post database, at least the 15th unarmed black man to be killed by police so far in 2016. And as we have found all too often in past cases, the shape-shifting police accounts were more often about finding ways to avoid responsibility for this than actually to investigate it. But the only thing that all accounts agree on is that Crutcher's vehicle was stopped in the middle of the road. Police accounts can't even agree on whether the engine was running or not. The initial police story said it was stalled. But Scott Wood, who's the lawyer for the cop who actually pulled the trigger, whose name is Betty Shelby, he said that she found it with the engine running and the doors open. That same initial police story had it that two officers were walking towards the SUV when Crutcher approached them from the side of the road. But again, according to her own lawyer, Shelby arrived at the scene several minutes before anyone else. She was alone and had already spoken to Crutcher, and this is important, so remember it. She had already checked the driver's side of the car before Crutcher approached her. Now, the initial cop claim went on to claim that Crutcher refused to follow commands, and when they got closer to the vehicle, he reached inside the vehicle, and at that time there was a taser deployment, and a short time later, one shot fired. Wait, short time later? He was tasered, and then they still shot him? Well, that won't do it all. So it became, in the lawyer's words, the taser and the gun were fired simultaneously. No gap. Because he reached in the window. Remember that. Most of this got blown away when the video was released, which clearly shows Crutcher walking slowly toward his car, away from the cops, with his hands raised, and he's not approaching them. He was followed closely first by one cop, then by two, then by four, at least three of who had their guns drawn. Crutcher can be seen leaning against his car before he suddenly falls to the ground as a woman's voice calls out, "Shots fired." He lies on the ground bleeding to death as three cops, in a moment that is really bitterly amusing, back away from him as if they are afraid he will rise from the grave to strike them down. Crutcher lies there about 2 minutes before anyone actually even bothers to check on him. No attempt is made to render any sort of aid, even though it turned out that Shelby had some EMT training and had a trauma bag in her trunk. Shelby claimed that she thought Crutcher was behaving like somebody who was possibly under the influence of PCP, and the cops made a big point of announcing the next day that, very conveniently, a vial of PCP had been found in the car, although they wouldn't or couldn't say where in the car it was found. But the idea of killing someone because they looked like they were high, even on angel dust, obviously wouldn't fly. So we're actually left with the claim that Crutcher, with four cops gathered around him and a police helicopter circling overhead, reached into his car for some unknown, completely irrational, but we're supposed to assume completely nefarious reason, and that justified his immediate execution. But the next day, attorneys for the Crutcher family showed an enhanced screen capture from the police video taken from the helicopter, which appeared to show that the window was closed, with a streak of blood running all the way down the window and across the side of the car. Appeared to show, that is, that there was no way Crutcher could have reached inside the car, that story was a lie. Now, the image is obviously not going to be very crisp and clear. It is a still taken from a video, and obviously it's even harder to make it out here. But I encourage you to seek out a better picture of this. You can find it on the web, on the internet, so go look for it. My own take on this picture, however, is that the driver's window does seem a little reflective, which would indicate that there was glass there, which would mean the window was closed. Compare the driver's side window to the windshield and how they appear. In the windshield, we know there was glass there. Now, on the other hand, and in all fairness, which is more than was given to Terence Crutcher, I suspect that the line from the top right corner, as you look at it, the top right corner of the driver's side window, from the top of the window frame, is actually, it's identified as blood by the family, but I actually think it's the shoulder strap of a seatbelt. However, at the very bottom of the window frame, still on the window frame, but immediately above the door panel, is a blotch whose color appears to match what is undeniably blood streaking down the side of the car. My conclusion? The window was closed and the cops were lying. But here's where something becomes important, something I told you to remember. Remember that according to her lawyer, Shelby had already checked the driver's side of the car before she had any interaction with Crutcher. So even if I'm wrong, even if the family is wrong, even if the window was rolled down, and even if Crutcher, for some unfathomable reason, did reach in through that window, Betty Shelby still, based on her own account, would have had no reason to shoot Terence Crutcher because she would have already checked that area and would have known there was no weapon there. Every version of the story offered by police breaks down, and the meaning of the arguments made is even more chilling than the deceptions themselves. For example, according to Tulsa Police Chief Chuck Jordan, Shelby, this is what he said, Shelby told the dispatcher that she was not having cooperation from Crutcher. She then aimed and took fire. So what, you don't cooperate and so we kill you? Shelby thought Crutcher was on PCP. So what, we think you're high, so we kill you? A man in the helicopter can be heard saying, "Time for a taser," and then says, "That looks like a bad dude, too." So what, we think you look like a bad dude, so we kill you? You reach through a window to where we know that there is no weapon there. So we kill you? I don't know exactly what motivated Betty Shelby to pull the trigger that Friday evening, but I do know this. When Benjamin Crump, attorney for the family, called it clearly a case of excessive force, he was wrong. This was not excessive force. This was murder. And we are taking a break. Hi there, and we're back. I have what you might consider an extended footnote to what has gone before. When we face the issue of police violence, when we face the issue of police killing unarmed people, we instinctively look for reasons. There has to be a reason why this happens. So you want some reasons why we keep coming across stories like this, why we keep having stories like this, keep covering the same ground, why the stories keep arising? I'll give you some. And here, I'm not even going to be talking about the racism that runs through many of these accounts, where being black is to be menacing, where just by being black you look like a bad dude. Instead, I'm going to be talking about what could be called institutional reasons. Here's one such reason. After Terence Crutcher was shot, someone on the police radio can be heard saying, "Shots fired, we have one suspect down." Suspect? What was he suspected of? What crime was he being investigated for? The answer, of course, is that he wasn't suspected of anything except perhaps being a bad dude. Yet simply by having an encounter with police, he becomes a suspect. Because too often to police, there's two kinds of people in the world. There's police and there's suspects. We are all suspects for them. And suspects, of course, are by their nature dangerous to some degree or another. I've said this before, we are teaching cops to be afraid. We are teaching, and I mean actively teaching, cops to be in constant fear of instant death, to be prepared to shoot first and ask questions later, to feel it's not only their right but their duty to, if at all possible, avoid any degree of risk, even if that means just pushing that risk onto others. There is, for example, something taught in a lot of police academies. It's actually taught. It's called the 21-foot rule. This holds that someone with a bladed weapon who is less than 21 feet away from a cop can rush and injure or kill them before the cop can get their gun out and fire. Now, not only has this rule actually been questioned, but it's been distorted. This is what's more important. It's been distorted in the way it's been taught and applied to essentially mean that if you are carrying a blade within 21 feet of a cop, they are justified in killing you on the grounds that they are in imminent danger of death. No actual aggressive move on your part is required. That's got to change. That kind of stuff, teaching cops to be afraid, has got to change, or the body count will just keep rising. So far in 2016, 40 cops nationwide have been shot and killed in the line of duty. At the same time, 706 people have been shot and killed by cops. 41 of those were unarmed. Cops have killed more unarmed people than the total number of cops killed by others. That training to be afraid, to think of everyone as a potentially dangerous suspect, is one reason why we keep seeing these sorts of stories. Here's another. In covering the Crutcher family's contention that the window to Terence Crutcher's SUV was closed, the Washington Post reported that, quoting, "If confirmed by police, the admission would eliminate one of the chief justifications for police using deadly force against Crutcher." Now, first, actually would eliminate the only justification, but if confirmed by police, what does that mean? Does it mean that when police are involved, we have to wait for the judgment of the accused? That when it comes to people who are shot in the street by people in a uniform, that we have to wait for the accused to decide what isn't true, what isn't fact? That attitude among the media of it's not true unless an official says it is, positively encourages evasion, subject changing, and outright lying by police when they are faced with uncomfortable truths. That's another reason why Terence Crutcher is just one of many. But there's another one, and it's even a bigger one. I've said several times in discussing cop violence that most cops are good cops. Most cops are just trying to do the best, the most professional job they can for themselves and their communities. And I'll add here that my own personal encounters with cops, apart from the one some years ago where a cop hassled, rousted, and unlawfully searched me and two friends and then essentially told us to get out of town because we were hippies. Other than that, my encounters with cops in my life has for the most part been professional and courteous. But for that very reason, the fact that most cops are good, honest cops, trying to do the best, the most professional job they can, for that reason, it's vital that those good cops stop shielding the bad ones. And beyond that, it's vital that city administrations stop agreeing to police union contracts with ethically outrageous provisions, such as common ones that actively shield police from being immediately questioned or investigated like the way the rest of us would if any crime was actually suspected. And contracts to provide for an internal appeals process so tilted that it almost guarantees that any discipline imposed on a cop will be reduced, if not tossed out entirely. Because why should we expect any change in cop behavior when there are no consequences for doing the wrong thing? When your contract protects you, your union protects you, and your colleagues who know what you did stand silent, why would it change? One of the things that some police departments look to in looking for red flags of possible misconduct is how many resisting arrest charges get added to other charges when someone is arrested, especially if those other charges are later dismissed or dropped, because resisting arrest is frequently used as a cover for police brutality. Oh no, I wasn't using excessive force, he was resisting me. Well, the NYPD, New York, the NYPD, is among the departments that actually tracks resisting arrest data this way. About 2 years ago, one research crunched NYPD arrest stats since 2012 and found that just 5% of cops accounted for 40% of all resisting arrest charges. In fact, the majority of New York cops had not filed a single resisting arrest charge in that entire time. What that means is this sort of red flag, resisting arrest charges, was concentrated among a very small number of cops. And which also means that it is very likely that examples of excessive force, of police brutality, are likewise concentrated around that 5%. And it is vital that the 95% stop protecting the 5%. Those cops who want to do the right thing, who want to have good relations with the community, those cops who are not going to reach for the club or the mace or the gun at the first provocation, those cops who do not want to divide the world into cops and suspects, they have got to speak up, they've got to stand up and stop shielding those who do want to divide the world. Now, is that professionally risky for a cop? It most certainly is. Is it personally risky for a cop? Well, Frank Serpico, who said that after he became a whistleblower, his calls for backup got called slowly, if at all, well, he would say yes. Then again, we're always being told how dangerous police work is, so maybe they should just think of this as another part of the job, another part of their commitment to protect and serve. The issue, the problem, the disease of police brutality, of excessive force, extends beyond the minority communities in this country, although they clearly bear the greatest brunt of it, with black men being 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by a cop than a white man, and an unarmed black man 5 times more likely to be killed by cops than an unarmed white man. But the fact is, it does extend beyond the minority community, and the single most important reason this scourge continues to fester in our society is the reluctance of the vast majority of good cops to stand up, to speak out. And I fear that until that changes, little else will. All right, that's really it for this week. I've got some stuff to talk about on a different topic about the show itself. We're going to be taking a bit of a break. This is actually show number 261, which means last week was 260, cleverly enough. Some months ago, I set myself a goal of doing 260 shows. Now, it seems like an odd number, my 260. You think we're more used to rounder numbers like 250 or 300 or whatever. So why 260? Well, this is a weekly show. And which I'm sure you know, but what you probably don't know is about the first year and a half, there were no breaks. I mean, about the first 70 or 80 shows were done in those same 70 or 80 weeks. So I started thinking some months ago that if I did 5 years of shows without a break, 5 shows, 52 weeks a year for 5 years, that would be 260 shows. So 260 sort of became a symbolic number that indicated 5 full years of shows. So that was what I set myself. So it's been 5 years, and it's kind of time for a change. So Left Side is taking a break. Now, you got to make sure this is absolutely clear. We are not going away forever. We are not disappearing. This is not the end of Left Side. None of that. But we are taking an extended break, a break of 1 month. The next show will be for the week of October 27th to November 2nd, just in time to face up to the election. In fact, I've had people ask me why, with the election coming up, why I'm taking this break now. But you've likely noticed, if you watch the show at all, that I barely mention the election, especially in the last several weeks. I figured, in fact, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I'd actually mentioned it. But turns out it was wrong. I went back and I actually found 7 times I mentioned the election. 6 of them were about the primaries. That I will add is leaving aside posts that have to do with voting rights and so on. This was posts about the candidates in the campaign. Thing is, I just try to make it a practice not to spend a lot of time on what everybody else is talking about. So I really don't feel it's a failing on my part to take a break now, because if you want to hear about the election, if you want to hear about Hillary Clinton, if you want to hear about Donald the Rump, you can find that anywhere. You don't need me for that. But I wanted to mention something here. One of those 6, remember I said I actually did 6 posts about the primaries, 7 total, 6 about the primaries. One of those 6 came in June, just before the primaries ended. And it listed 9 issues that came up in the Democratic primaries that I predicted would not be discussed in the fall campaign between Clinton and the rump. Those 9 were single-payer health care, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, income inequality, a $15 an hour minimum wage, poverty and homelessness, student debt, tuition-free college, too big to fail, and campaign finance reform. Now, I'll let you decide how I did. Frankly, I think I did a pretty fair job on predicting what would not be talked about. And that's another reason why, frankly, I feel no guilt about taking a break now, because the election just has not really figured in the show here. So we are taking a month off, and it's not just a vacation. I said I think after 5 years it's time to make some changes. So one thing is that I'm looking to get some new graphics. Figure after 5 years, different opening would be good. I've actually gotten back in touch with the person who did the original graphics for the show, so that which is good, because then he understands the nature, he understands what the show is about, and so that'll be helpful in designing new graphics. We're also changing the name of the show, and I was going to keep it as a surprise as to what the name is, but then it occurred to me that if you didn't know the name, you might not know how to look for it. So the show, coming back in October, the show is no longer going to be called Left Side of the Aisle. The new name for this show is What's Left. What's Left. There's going to be a few changes in the show. One thing is that we're apparently going to have some guest commentaries. I'm hoping to have kind of like a regular stable of people who, somebody every week somebody will have 5 minutes to talk about whatever they want to talk about. I also want to do more of, well, in a way, kind of what I did this week, a more in-depth look at some topic. It's too easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, the week-to-week news stories. There are disadvantages to trying to do that. I mean, for example, one example shows up this week when, because of the deadline and the timing of the show, I didn't talk anything about what's going on in Charlotte. And that was just the reality of the deadline of getting the show prepared. So I want to do more in-depth stuff. And also, I've described myself as a Democratic Socialist Green Peacenik. And I want to get into more what that actually means. Again, to not so get caught up in the week-to-week news, and more about what I'm about and the kind of changes that I think we should be seeing. So all of that. The show won't be dramatically different, okay? It will not be dramatically, hugely different, but there will still be some changes, hopefully an improvement. And so we will see you in 1 month. And in the meantime, you have the best month, the first month of fall that you possibly can. We will see you in a month. And for now, as always, peace.